Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are LoreLines, and we are going to be going over Ivalice lore today. We are here with our co-hosts Ayumi, Kurogane, and
Hi.
Shadowmeo,
Hey,
and they are going to be leading our panel tonight. So, everyone, please give them a warm welcome as we go into the realm of Ivalice in Final Fantasy XIV and what we can expect from that in the future.
Let me just say, first and foremost, hi. I'll introduce myself. Hi, I am Ayumi Kurogane. I am resident of Excalibur. I am a lore nut, just like the rest of these people that I work with. Um, I really, really love the Ivalice games. I love the Ivalice Alliance, Vagrant Story, Tactics Advance, Final Fantasy XII. I've played all of them, and I just find the universe that they're set in to be very fascinating and very enjoyable.
me?
hmm
Okay. Hey there, I'm Shadowmeo. I'm from Spain, so please apologies for my awful accent. I am also very much a lore nerd, lore diver for many years. And I'm the LoreLines crew specialist in madcap speculation and art director. And my Ivalice is like, to me, the epitome of a Final Fantasy world building. And yeah, my first Final Fantasy ever when I was 7 years old was Tactics Advance. So the Ivalice series hold a very dear place to me in my heart.
All right. Cobron, did you want to do an introduction, or shall we get right to it? Okay.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get right to it. I am going to be managing stream and fielding and directing questions. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and post them in chat on Twitch, or if you want to post them in game, Ayumi and Meowth can address them directly.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right. So first and foremost, Auracite. What the hell is it? Auracite is sometimes called a holy stone or zodiac stone in other games, or seiseki, as it's known in Japanese. It's the name of magical stones in several Final Fantasy games. It appears in both Ivalice and in 14. In 14, it has a much larger um, kind of presence in the form of it's used for both good and evil. In the Ivalice games, it is sometimes called magicite or crystals. And they sometimes can have the signs of the zodiac on them and release certain magical properties that turn people into beings known as Lucavi. Um, we will get to that. We will get to that. First and foremost, we get through Auracite, and we'll go into Ivalice. As for the games, the Auracite is found throughout Ivalice. There is no specific games that it is tied to or not found in, except for Vagrant Story. Vagrant Story is still part of the Ivalice Alliance series, but not directly tied in with any one particular game. Yeah.
Uh, in It's not particularly tied with Vagrant Story is not particularly tied to any Ivalice game, but we can find a kind of a suspiciously similar substitute to Auracite in Vagrant Story's lore and storyline. So we'll get into that later.
Yes. Where exactly did it come from? Well, at first, in 14, we find our first mention of Auracite to be the Heart of Sabik. It wasn't really called Auracite back then. It was mainly just called an Allegan relic. It was hinted at least until later, when it was mentioned to be something more. And we, of course, got our hands on a different type of Auracite called white Auracite, which was given to us by the Charlayan scholar Moonbrita. The white Auracite itself was a kind of container. It was a product of Charlayan knowledge, and it was kind of modified so that it could hold ether, and it was used in our struggle against Nabrialis and then later against Digiorum. There are many different types of Auracites. They serve all kinds of different functions and properties. The two I mentioned before. There's the Auracite, which can generally be found across Eorzea and Atheres. Interestingly enough, it's abundant. It's so abundant that people can just get their hands on it, apparently. The Bosgians and the Algans, they both got their hands on Auracites. And they've been known to manipulate its properties in both their Algan trigger weapons and Save the Queen trigger weapon as well. Going further than that, there is also Auracite known as synthetic Auracite. That was the product of Garlean research. It was Gaius van Baelsar's Garlean research into the Ultima weapon. And that was abandoned and then reopened by Valens von Varro and kind of modified to suit the purpose of creating more anti-iconic weaponry. Any input on this, Meowth?
It's basically the way it worked is basically the oversoul system, which is quite interesting in regards to the classic evolution Auracite, as it was meant to rewrite, so to speak, the driver with data. Let's say it was how it was said in the Warlit questline, with the data of someone of a particularly powerful legatus. So that's interesting to keep in mind for how Auracite in Ivalice works.
Yes. In the 13th, we actually get another type of Auracite. It's known as Memoria. This was confirmed by Unikali. We originally thought, at least according to our quest line, just going through it, we just thought, oh, it's just another crystal. But according to the post quest, in 6. I'd say by 6.4, 6.5, speaking to Unikali, he attests that it was indeed Auracite that was given to them. And in terms of how it works, it was used by the champions of the realm to contain the powers of the summoned primals, known as eidolons in the realm. The primal energies gradually bled out of the Auracite, just like the Lucavi do here, and it warped the wielders into fiends of endless appetite for ether, devouring the world's life force. Going back to another type of Auracite, beyond just regular Auracites, there exists a fifth kind of Auracite. This Auracite is similar to the first one, in that the first type of Auracite can be found pretty much anywhere, but it's also related to this fifth kind. Auracite created by Ultima. It can be found throughout Dalmasca. Ultima gifted this Auracite to people, amplifying their desires, their wants, their needs, whatever they sought to pursue in the world, basically. And it didn't just kind of stick to one person. What they transformed into, it didn't just kind of stick to, like, if I'm tangling around words here. So, in the Ivalice Alliance raid series, we see that Argath, who was a notable wielder of the Auracite, the Taurus Auracite, transformed into Duma when we went to face him. Later on, Begamnon picked it up and then transformed into
Yasmat.
Yasmat, yes. And from then, we can gather from that depending on the wielder, depending on their desires, depending on the stone, it can transform you into separate things. Auracite created by Ultima itself, according to the texts found in the game in tactics, it is said that the Auracite can fall from her wings. Whether or not that is related to 14 or whether or not she can do that in 14 remains to be seen. All we know is that Dalmasca and Auracite is more than likely related to the High Seraph. Go ahead, Meowth.
It's interesting to make. It's interesting to make the note in regards to the transformation. It's not just that we see, for example, Argas transforming into Duma or Bagamon transforming into Yasmat. We also see in Orbon kind of, you could say, like, quote unquote good characters such as Mustadio, Agrias, and Thundergold Seed transforming into Lucavi forms as well. But it's an interesting question how much in control they are of the Lucavi, depending on the individual. But considering how Lucavi possession works, but we're going to get into that a bit later.
Yes. So that kind of goes over their applications and their functions. What we know about Auracite is that it's a very powerful weapon. It's a very powerful item, and it can be used in many different ways as both a bane and a boon. It's controversial in its application. It can be found almost everywhere, from both the north to the south. We know that many empires have used it in the past, and we know that it is a fearsome type stone and magical property used in both of the tactics games, and it is known as Nethicite in 12. Do you want to go over that one, Meowth? Nethicite.
Yes. Especially considering certain elements of Dawntrail, considering that Nethicite is one such type of Auracite that if Magicite, for example, is you could say it's a magic it's an magically elementally charged piece of or crystal, whatever. Whenever you use Magicite once and unleash the energy containing Magicite, it dispels, and you cannot recharge Magicite. Nethicite, however, by itself doesn't have energy. What it does is absorbing the elemental energy or the mist in evolution contest. We would be more or less like the ether in 14. In 14 terms, it would basically draw ether and contain it, and then when released, it would amplify the effects. Can also change certain properties of the ether. It's depending on the type of Nethicite, can be absolutely destructive. So it's interesting to note Nethicite in certain aspects of what Dawntrail gave to us. So yeah.
Indeed. And we'll get into the origins of Nethicite later as well. But right now, I want to quickly go over the Zodiac Stones, which are forms of Auracite found in tactics. So you will actually find 12 or 13 of them, actually. 13 different Auracite pieces found in tactics. They all contain the markings of a Zodiac symbol. Capricorn, Aquarius, so on and so forth. They're all labeled very, very accordingly. And each of them summons a different Lucavi, or is attributed to a different Lucavi. Do you want to go ahead and go over this real quick, Meowth?
Yes. There's so many things we could say about the Zodiac Stones. But I mean, there's a lot. But
there is a lot.
There is. The Zodiac Stones are the most known form of Auracite in the Ivalice Alliance, even though, properly speaking, they only appear in tactics, like the first tactics. but their legacy is, you can see that in many other games of the Ivalice Alliance. Like, for example, I'm going to use an example of this from Final Fantasy XII, in which, even though it's not exactly a zodiac stone, whenever you defeat one of the Scions of Darkness, one of the Espers, you see then their glyphs encased in basically a crystal. You could kind of say it's there's an inspiration of the zodiac stones in this depiction. So you could say that even though it's only appeared in one game proper, their influence has carried on every single title of the Ivalice Alliance. And I must add, as a curiosity, that it's also been these things have also been paid homage in Final Fantasy IX, as 9 came after Tactics was released, and there's so many tributes in Final Fantasy IX to Final Fantasy Tactics. So it's interesting to bear that in mind come Dawntrail. Yeah.
It's also interesting to know that, and I'm sure as many of you have heard or at least seen the kind of comparisons to both the Ascians and the Lucavi themselves. I didn't know if any of you knew this. Maybe you did, maybe you hadn't. But in Final Fantasy XII, there are things called the Scions of Light and the Scions of Darkness. As for the Scions of Light, in 14, we have what are called the Lucavi. In 14, we also have what we know as the Ascians. The devs used this specific part of Ivalice history and part of the lore to name each of the Ascians and to name each of the Lucavi. So, for instance, the Scions of Darkness of Final Fantasy XII are named after each of the Lucavi, whereas the Scions of Light are named after each of the Ascians. They still keep their
properly the seat of the convocation. But yeah,
properly, yes. Yes, minus their true name.
The only exceptions, just a note, the only exceptions as to follow this rule are Ultima and Elubus, because in the Evolution lore, Ultima and Zodiac, which are direct opposites, don't have any equivalent. They're basically the capital D sphere of the element of holy and the element of dark.
Yes, they are essentially light and darkness themselves. So yeah, that's essentially where you got your names for each of the Lucavi and each of the Ascians, Ascian titles, essentially in 14. It's from the Espers in Final Fantasy XII and in Tactics. The wielders of the Auracite we've kind of gone over and pretty much, and the impact it's had throughout history. Auracite is it's pretty much been the point of many conflicts throughout history, and also the point of many turning points in wars. For instance, there was during the time of Allag, during the height of Allag, there was an Allagan defector who presented a trigger weapon to the people of Bosnia as a sort of peace agreement. And these Bosnian, the Bosnian, not the resistance, but the Bosnian people accepted it. And that was really their first interaction with Auracite. The Allagans created trigger weapons so as to harness the power of Void Scent. At the time, they needed a better way to kind of keep them in check, because at the time that they were holding dragons together with their technology, but as of course Xande made a pact with the Void, they found ways to keep Void Scent in check using the power of Auracite. It's interesting, really. All of this lore can actually too be found in Eureka Orthos if you've ever finished it. At the end of the Eureka Orthos quest line, there is an excerpt which can go over the rest of this. But yeah, aside from that, there's the Asians, of course, who give Auracite and the means of summoning primals to anyone and everyone who looks to gain and release that type of power. There is, of course, Argath and Begamnen, who were given that and started a conflict in Dalmasca. Really, anyone who and everyone who has come across Auracite and has not used it for synthetic purposes or to repurpose it into something good, it's always ended in calamity disaster. So
you could arguably discuss. I mean, of course, without going too much into it, but tends to be a theme that messing, dabbling on Auracite in any way or form tends to draw a disaster of some kind.
it is a catalyst. It's not even a mineral or rock anymore. It's a catalyst. And this all spawned, of course, from going back throughout history. The first documented Auracite was the Heart of Sabik. And it was Athena herself that coined the term Auracite. And when she named it the Heart of Sabik, it was the first Auracite, and it was the first and only black Auracite that we know of. The rest of them have been white. This was the first black one, first and only black one. I guess you could even go as far as to say that it might kind of be a cheeky reference to Black Materia from 7. You could, but that's a completely different thing, and we're going into the realm of theory crafting, so I'll leave that aside now. Now then, what Cobb mentioned earlier, Ivalice. I'm sure you guys are all wondering about this. So I have compiled a small summary of each of the main games in the Ivalice Alliance series. There is going to be spoilers in this next part. I suggest if you are not keen on them to mute now. And I will tell you, Cobb will tell you in the chat when we're done. So let's go into tactics. Spoilers once again for Tactics, Final Fantasy XII, and Vagrant Story. So, as for Tactics, Ivalice was embroiled in a conflict called the Lion War, which saw the kingdom divided over who would become king. Records state that a hero named Delita appeared and took the throne himself, but the Durai papers reveal that Ramsa was the true hero of this tale. His involvement with the war was covered up by the church, who branded him a heretic. Over the course of the game, you learn of Delita's and Ramsa's friendship and their eventual split due to political disagreements, stemming from a conflict between a peasant army and a marquis. The peasant army then takes Delita's sister hostage, whom they mistook for being a member of the Belouves, and Ramsa's brother then gives the order to shoot her, to display the lengths that they are willing to go to preserve the peace. A set of dramatic events occur thereafter, and the rest of the game sees the two of them on separate paths pursuing the same goals, stopping the prince's devious agendas and putting a mysterious cult pulling the strings of both sides to the sword. And that is a very, very, very condensed version of Tactics.
Very condensed indeed.
Very condensed. Super condensed. This next excerpt is from 12. It's not the whole thing, but this one relates directly to 14 in a very big way. The party, there's a point in the game where the party journeys to Arcadia, where they discover that Dr. Sid, the creator of manufactured nethicite, who directs them to Giravegan to find the source of the original nethicite. In Giravegan, Ash encounters the crafters of nethicite, the immortal Okuria, who, quote-unquote, pull the strings of history. They give her the fabled treaty blade to cut the new pieces from the Suncrest, the source of all nethicite. It is discovered that Vana, one of the Okuria, has defected to pull the reins of history back into the hands of man. Sounds familiar, I know. Manipulating Vane in his quest to conquer Ivalice and prompting Sid to create manufactured magicite to reduce the power of the Okuria.
It's important to note in here that I don't know if you guys can relate, just a note, but I did. It's proper to be reminded that Vena in Final Fantasy XII, even when her motives are not are morally gray, she's posed as an antagonist in 12.
Yes. Yes, she's not a primary antagonist, but she's adjacent to one of the primary antagonists. Vagrant story. So the protagonists Ashley and Callow arrive in Leamond, which is a real location in 14, and a lone Ashley infiltrates the city through the underground wine cellars. Along the way, he learns of objects holding magical power known as grimoires, and the city's power to spawn the undead and mythological creatures. He encounters Guilderstern and his lover Samantha, and learns of the condition known as incomplete death and the Cardinal's true intention for pursuit of Sydney, immortality. Later, Guilderstern continues on to the Grand Cathedral in the center of the city, leading him to Callow and the others, interrogating them about a certain key known as the Blood Sin. He reveals its intentions in acquiring the Dark, which is a source of powerful magic. Sydney arrives to teleport Hardin and the rest away, leaving him to Guilderstern. Guildenstern acquires the key from him and murders Samantha as his sacrifice for the powers of darkness. Ashley arrives later and listens as Sydney reveals his true intentions. Ashley then confronts Guildenstern and manages to defeat him. There is a point to this second paragraph, and I'll let Meowth go ahead and cover this.
Second paragraph of Vagrant Story.
Of the
so
Blood Sin and the Dark.
The Dark is quite interesting too. We're so used to the concept of dark being associated with evil, and to be fair, the people of Vagrant Story consider it a source of many evils. But that's because the dark in Vagrant Story is the source of magic and really powerful gifts. Even getting in contact with the dark of the city of Leamonde is enough to taint you with the dark, but in truth, it's actually just a massive source of power. In Tactics, War of the Lions, well, I think it was both in Tactics actually. The War of the Lions is the remaster for PSP.
Yes.
The host of Zodiac, Elidbus, which that's from where the seed name comes in 14, does have a job command called the Dark. Zodiac is the Esper of Dark, then it makes sense. But the way it's rendered, it's an allusion to the dark concept from Vagrant Story. The Blood Sin is called the Reverse Root, and it's vaguely in shape of a key. That's why it's called a key. It's basically a back tattoo that marks someone as a bearer of the power of the dark. It's basically like a living key to the city of Leamonde, which is actually the Grand Grimoire itself as the source of, magic. Grimoires in Vagrant Story work basically kind of like Auracite, and there's one particular in Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced that does work as full Auracite, but yeah, that's why I said that there was something in Vagrant Story that's not like Auracite, but worse like Auracite.
It works kind of like it, but not quite in name.
In name.
Yes. So that covers a brief summary of each of the main games' stories. So if you're interested in them, if that interested you, I definitely recommend picking them up and giving them a playthrough. Okay, and spoilers. Spoilers done now. Spoilers are free.
As another titles we only went over 3 of them, but
Yes.
That's actually Ivalice Alliance is Final Fantasy Tactics, with the remaster being War of the Lions, Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings, which is the sequel to 12. There would be a Vagrant Story. There would be also Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and then Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 2. That's the full that's the full Ivalice Alliance.
Yes, there is. It's a massive collection of games set in the Evalician universe. And although you don't have to play them all to get the story, it's definitely recommended that you play at least the 3 mentioned tactics, 12 and Vagrant Story, to kind of get a generalized picture of what this world, what this setting is.
Or watch a playthrough if you're broke.
As for how they adopted for an MMO, adopting them for an MMO, it can be very difficult to kind of adopt it and kind of import these types of universes into 14, even though, your game is pretty much a theme park of this and that, and, you could have this Final Fantasy IV themed area here, Final Fantasy VIII themed area here. What 14 did was import all of Dalmasca and a couple of cities from Vagrant Story and 12. As for what was all included with 12, with Dalmasca, they pretty much imported the Giza Plains, the Dalmascan Deserts, Rabanastre, the central area to the game itself. And they also brought over the Golmore Jungle, which is the home of the Vera.
And the Ridorana Lighthouse.
And the Ridorana Lighthouse. Yes. The Ridorana Lighthouse's location is a sort of kind of an assumption at this point. It is not located on the map, yet the in-game text says it is south of the Dalmascan Desert itself, so it could be just a little ways off the southwest coast. The Skatay Range itself, too, is a set of mountains to the north of Dalmasca. It's home to the Vina Vera, the fair-skinned Vera. They live in the mountains there. Dalmasca itself was subject to colonization and rule by the Garleans, and still is. It has been sectioned off and split into 2 areas. The area that is currently under Garlean occupation, full Garlean occupation, is known as Dalmasca Superior. And that includes the Dalmascan Desert, the ruined city of Rabanastre now, and the area, the offshore, including the Ridorana Lighthouse. The other part, including the southern tip of Authard, including the Golmore Jungle, and to the east, the port city of Valnain, or the capital of Valnain, and then to the south, the very tip of Authard, there's a port city called Leamond. That part of Dalmasca is called Dalmasca Inferior because despite all of the Garleans' technology and power, they were unable to fully subjugate the Golmore Jungle and the rest of Dalmasca. So they call it Superior for the portion that they were able to bring to heel, and Inferior for the portion that they weren't able to control, but they were able to take cities and make cities and create encampments there, such as the capital, which they consider the capital to this day, of Dalmasca, which is Valnain. They also have a port city in the south, like I said, called Leamond, which they use. It's a mystery at this point how much they use at this point of that port city. But I'm hopeful that we will possibly get a chance to go there and to Valnain. Valnain in the Bosnian articles, if anyone's done the field records, they mentioned that Lion pursued Gabranth to Valnain and burnt the city down at this point, and then disappeared. But it's kind of up in the air at this point what you want to believe. So that pretty much covers all of what was imported from the Evalician universe as far as like geographical locations. As for like references, in the game, they could be found kind of sprinkled throughout the game itself. Ul'dah itself was heavily influenced by Rabanastre, heavily influenced, to the point where if you saw the Chocobo stalls, where you got your Chocobo from, they are a one-for-one port of the ones from 12. Yath, do you have anything to say on this?
I'm kind of thinking of more recent 12 references. So if you if you want to go for the previous ones, I can take the Don't Trail
Modern
part.
ones? Okay, all right. So yeah, it's there's influences to be had in both Ul'dah and the Ul'dah Desert, which I believe to be heavily influenced anyways by Ivalice anyways, because Yoshida has admitted in the past to be a huge Matsuno fan, just like us. So he tries to sneak in references when he can everywhere and anywhere. Why don't you just go ahead?
Let's see. If I'm going into Dawn Trail has very sneaky references to Final Fantasy XII. As one of them is actually Everkeep. Especially if you watch Everkeep from outside, you will see certain platforms hovering in the air. These are almost taken, except almost in design they're basically the same. The color is different, but they're taken from the city of Kurogane from Final Fantasy XII, which is a very interesting place if you know your 12 lore.
Yes.
Also, the fact that, for example, Everkeep is stated to have 12 levels, and the one that's the 12th level, that's the one that's we visited as living memory. It got cut at the 11th. The final one is the 12th level of Everkeep.
I'm sure a lot of people would disagree, saying it was from 9, but we can agree to disagree.
I said what it is in game set. I'm not going into anything else.
So we've covered the geography and kind of references. Now let's go over the races of the region, because they have races there that we don't see anywhere else. So a good portion of the Dalmascan population is here, but they also have many, many other races there as well that we see. There's one that we see elsewhere, but we don't see another one very much elsewhere either, and that's the Numo and the Baanga. The Numo we actually first meet in Shadowbringers when we go to the land of the Fae. They're an actual Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and a Final Fantasy XII staple race. Another one, the Baanga, they are another race that we hardly see, though. They aren't found anywhere else except for the area of Dalmasca. They are known to be exceptionally mean and temperamental to a degree. They make really good mercenaries. They make really good fighters. You can ask Meowth about that. Final
Yes,
Fantasy Tactics
to be
Advance.
to be actually honest, the evolution iconic races were not present in the original Tactics. They were introduced in Tactics Advance, and from there is when they were formally introduced as part of the world building of Final Fantasy XII. So in that aspect, we owe Final Fantasy Tactics Advance the races of Ivalice. Also, another detail that you would know if you ask or go around in the voice records of Bozia with the Yalagan note, Wagi, one of Bagamnan's pals, you can learn about Baanga lore if you ask him, and he tells you that actually Baangas are not reptiles; they're actually mammalian. So do not call them lizards.
Do not call them lizards. You will get punched.
Yes.
Like I said, they are very temperamental. And then we also see another race in Dalmasca, which we see everywhere now. The Viera.
The Viera.
Yes, the Viera come from the region of Dalmasca, and not just one of the subclasses of them, but both of them. One resides in the Skatay Range, and the other one resides in the Gulmore Jungle. So both of them, we actually kind of, I believe, yeah, it was me who wrote the video on this. So if you like, you can go ahead and check our channel. I actually did a whole video on the lore and the history of the Viera. So if you have the time, go and check it out.
So, as a curiosity about the Viera, male Vieras were first ever seen in Final Fantasy XIV.
Yes, it was the first place that they were mentioned and first place they were seen.
Not mentioned because they were mentioned in 12.
Well, we
had never seen them.
They were mentioned in the games, but never seen.
Correct.
Now, besides the races, there's also a couple of legends involved with the area of Dalmasca, and also one that they share with Razat Han, who is not too far away. It's just off the western coast of Dalmasca and pretty much a small boat ride away. So during the time of the War of the Lions, it was before the time of the War of the Lions. There existed a group of individuals who wielded powerful weapons known as the Zodiac Braves. Meowth, I want you to go over this one.
The Zodiac Braves. So they're supposed to be in legend. This is also a legend taken from Tactics. They're supposed to be a group of 12 warriors, blessed each by wielding one of the Zodiac stones. It's interesting in the sense that these supposed warriors, wielding each one of the Zodiac stones, are supposed to appear in Evolution lore whenever there's a threat to the world, especially related to the Lucavi. And it's said that once they accomplish this mission, they vanish, and they return every time the world is in need. Which, in a sense, you could say it's almost a tale very reminiscent of the classical Warriors of Light, with difference that this time around the Zodiac Braves are actually marked by wielding a stone as related to the Zodiac side. And if we've gone over the convocation seats before, so it's quite interesting to make that connection. Let's going to leave it at that.
Yeah. So, and referring to the Zodiac Braves, so the interesting thing about the legend here, and I'm sure you've actually heard of it, if for those who have gone and done the Realm Reborn relic quests, you have probably heard of this legend. Not the Atma. Was it the Atma, or was it the
the Zodiac weapon questline?
It was the Atma.
Yeah, the Atman is the first stage of the Zodiac weapon.
Yep. So when you are in the Atma stage, the person I forget his name. It's a foreign name, but he is telling you about the story of the Zodiac Braves, and that Razat Han has its own Zodiac Braves legend, apart from the one in Dalmasca. Now, how these two are connected is unknown. It could be the same people. It couldn't. It could not be. They have their own kind of legend about them, and the weapons that you are creating in A Realm Reborn are related to the ones that were wielded in the Zodiac Braves Rods and Hans stories. So that was a neat little tidbit I thought that we could stumble upon.
It's interesting to note that the trials of the Braves, of the Zodiac Braves, mentioned in the Thavnarian version of the myth, involve quote-unquote feasting of the souls of your opponents. Take that as you will.
Feasting of the souls of your opponents. That's right. Nom nom nom.
Nom nom nom.
So as for the Zodiac Brave story, let's kind of go back in time in 14 history to the beginning of how Dalmasca was kind of formed. So what started the Zodiac Braves story? Well, in the distant past, in the far, far distant past, we're talking probably around the 4th Astral Era, Dalmasca was embroiled in a holy war with the region of the Holy Edoran Empire. There was a bloody conflict in that 12 knights, known as the Zodiac Braves, took up arms and fought in this conflict. One of them, known as Saint Ajora, who decided to sell his comrades out for coin, decided it would be a good idea to march to the capital city, the enemy capital city, and summon Ultima right then and there. Summoning Ultima destroyed Malond, which is the capital city of the Holy Edoran Empire. Summoning Ultima destroyed and sunk Malond beneath the waves. Now, in the Zodiac Braves' eyes, this was seen as kind of heresy and a kind of incredibly bad thing to do at the time. So they denounced Ajora. They actually turned on Ajora. Meowth, want to go ahead?
They turn against Jorah, and it's quite interesting too. First of all, we don't know how many the Zodiac Braves were in 14. We know that in tactics they were 12, and there was Jorah. You could say he was the 13th. There's a bit of, I mean, tactics is not very solid with the Christianity parallels there, as Jorah is supposed to work as a Jesus figure, which actually he was basically more like Judas. But anyways, setting aside that, depending on how many in 14 contexts there are, we could be talking about 13 Zodiac Braves and Saint Jorah, which would make 14, or we could be talking about 12 Zodiac Braves with Jorah would make 13. So that's interesting to bear in mind, I would say, because we don't know that.
Of course.
But it's because the 13th Auracite, the Fucus one, is treated like the obscure, mysterious 13th Zodiac sign. In tactics, we know that the wielder of this Zodiac stone was the sorcerer and hero of the 50 Years' War, Elizabeth. But in this context, we are not sure. So
yes, there was an Elidibus in tactics.
Yes. So it's interesting to bear that in mind, because if there were 14, as in 13 Zodiac Braves, and then a 14th one in Saint Ajora, in terms of what it could represent, it's interesting.
So yes, you can thank Saint Ajora of the Zodiac Braves from the 4th Astral Era for summoning Ultima to this star. Now let's go into Ultima. Ultima is an interesting figure. It is a boss that is seen throughout the Final Fantasy games. It is either seen as a super boss or a last boss of the game, or just a major antagonistic villain.
In
In
most Final
14,
Fantasy, I don't know, and just the moment that in most Final Fantasy games outside Ivalice Alliance, the usual form in which you will face an Ultima is as the Ultima weapon. Ultima as an entity named Ultima, it's only happened in, I would say, 2 games.
2 games, yeah. So you would face it as either a weapon or as an entity itself. The 14 version of Ultima is an interesting one in the sense that it has 2 different sides to it. Ultima itself, as we know from Pandemonium, it's mentioned Pandemonium, was not a primal to begin with. And we know that according to the texts from Saint Ajora, that it was summoned here to this star. It came here to this star, but it was summoned in its primal form back during the Holy Idran Empire War. Ultima itself is an extra-dimensional being. Extra-dimensional being, not only is it extraterrestrial, not only can it traverse the stars, but it can traverse dimensions, the spaces between spaces. It came here long, long, long ago, and it met Athena and gave her the first Auracite, the Heart of Sabik. After that, we really don't know anything of what it did since meeting Athena, all the way up to when it showed itself again during the Fourth Astral Era, when it was summoned in primal form. Now, the reason these two aren't this one and the same is that a physical form and a primal form differ in how they are summoned. So the physical one came here long, long ago. It wasn't prayer and sacrifice weren't needed to summon Ultima in the past, in the days of the Sundered World. She came here, she landed, she gave a rock to an unsundered person. That's it. During the Holy Idran Empire War, she was summoned through prayer and will by Ajora onto the capital city of Milan. Thus, did we have our primal version of Ultima, which we fought recently in Stormblood. So, when we defeated the High Seraph in Stormblood, that was just one part of it. All we did was we beat the primal version back into its hole when the real version exists elsewhere. Yes.
What to say? First, I think it's important that we're saying that Ultima met Athena, but that's a way of speaking. We don't really know what happened. Either as if Ultima bestowed made the Heart of Sabik, or what would become the Heart of Sabik, whatever. Made Athena stumble upon it, or if there was a meeting, or there was some manipulation. We don't know that. That's I would say that's the scariest thing of the whole deal. That we don't really know the circumstances of this quote unquote meeting, like how old even Ultima is, or how old has she been on Etheris. That's
we don't even know if we can use the she pronoun. We don't know what it is.
I mean, yeah, that's fair, but still.
It's out there somewhere. We just don't know where. And we also know throughout history that she has been beaten back several times, actually, and not just by us, but by other warriors of light, including Ramza, and beaten back by Hydaelyn, who originally sealed her. Hydaelyn was unable to completely remove and excise Ultima from the Earth, from Atheres, so she sealed her away. If
But
that
we don't
gives you any
either know.
indication.
Yeah, but we don't either know if that sealing away that incarnation was a primal on her own. So there's so many things about Ultima in the incarnation post Sundering that could just be primal incarnations of her.
Yep.
The real Ultima is the real presence there. That's we barely know anything about her, and there's something in Pandemonium that's especially creepy, and it's that Ultima spreads her influence through cognition hazards. Like, if you know about it may be tied not just to Ultima, but could be almost tied to the concept of godhood, as Athena went into her mental state by pursuing godhood, and that intensified the 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 influence, so to speak. So it's scary to have an enemy that does use knowledge and your own mind, and you don't even know it's there. I think that's the real scary thing about Ultima.
She is a stand-in for an old god, for those that kind of know their chthonic mythology or kind of want to go into that kind of mythos.
Lovecraftian.
Yep, Lovecraftian. She's a stand-in for Genova too, I guess you could say.
In a sense, yes.
An otherworldly being that we don't know too much about, and we probably will never know too much about.
Like, there's some references to Ultima and meteors here and there that I suppose that enhances the Genova parallels. But yes, they're
like the ones from Dawn Trail.
I wasn't even meaning to go into that, but you took the bite. That's okay.
How about those meteors from Yachtel?
Brew to top it.
But that's a completely different topic. That's a speculation topic, which we'll leave that alone there. Let's go into the life and legacy of Matsuno. Do you know much about this one? Meow.
Also, me a bit, but I was saving this thing I actually forgot. Sorry, when we mentioned earlier Guru Vegan related to Everkeep, I said
Yes.
it was important too as well, because in Guru Vegan you can find, this is kind of spoilers, but I'm going to keep it as spoilerless as possible. In Guru Vegan, this the city of the Korea, and it houses the Great Crystal. The background of the interior of the Great Crystal, the walls of it, when you're walking into, I wouldn't say it's confirmed, but I do see an interesting reference there, possible reference with Heideman's trial, like the ad face with the crystals, as in the background. You see the background in that trial going golden crystalline. That's almost the same background as the walls of the Great Crystal. And that's also interesting, because the Great Crystal in Final Fantasy XII is where you find and fight Ultima. So keep that in mind. That's why it's important. Okay, Matsuno. We were talking about Matsuno.
Matsuno, yes. So Yasumi Matsuno, he is the father of Ivalice, and it's the world it involves in. So he was born on October 24th, 1965. He's around 58 years old today. Matsuno kind of grew up in a kind of rural area, kind of an out-of-the-way area, where he felt that his only entertainment was movies, television, books. He had hobbies like making dioramas and watching old kind of documentaries. He was particularly fond of like the World War II dioramas. He would make little figures and kind of imitate what he saw and read in history books at his local library. He would incorporate story elements into each of his creations too. So that's kind of where he got his start into kind of scenario writing. His introduction to video games was Space Invaders and Xevious at the arcades when waiting for the train. He was fond of Legend of Zelda and Dragon Quest on Nintendo, and he played heavily on PC Ultima Online, which ironically is one of Yoshi P's favorite games. He attended Hosei University for foreign policy, but then dropped out after 3 years because he found work as an economic reporter. But he found the work just kind of tiring and unfulfilling. While job hunting, he found work at a small game company called Quest. He began his career there, and in 1993 he served as the director of Ogre Battle, The March of the Black Queen for Super NES. It was an episodic series of tactical role-playing games. He was inspired by British rock band Queen's second album, which contained the songs Ogre Battle and The March of the Black Queen. So that's kind of where he took inspiration from. And the C in the Ogre Battle universe was also named after the Seven Seas of Rye. The next game he worked on was Tactics Ogre, which was released in 1995, and of course a remake much later on, in the present day.
To play it.
It's very good. The political narrative of the game revolved around the reality of war, which at the time was about the Bosnian genocide and the Yugoslav wars.
Yes, it's basically the Balkan Wars made into a video game.
In 1995, after he finished Tactics Ogre, he joined Square after quitting Quest. At Square, Matsuno directed and wrote Final Fantasy Tactics for the PlayStation under the direction of Hironobu Sakaguchi. Similar in design to Tactics Ogre, it was lauded for its story. Highly praised. After he finished with Tactics, he began work on Vagrant Story. It was smaller than Tactics. It was still highly regarded by critics and gained somewhat of a cult following since. A little tidbit you did not know, though, you may have not known, though, Matsuno supervised Play Online. Don't blame him for
That
the
monster.
Don't blame him for all of what's wrong with it. He's just one of them.
Everything's wrong with it.
Square's online gaming software prior to its first beta release in 2001. He then served as a producer for Tactics Advance for the Game Boy Advance. And in 2001, he was assigned to work on 12 as director together with Hiroyuki Ito. He came up with a design with the game's original concept and plot. Matsuno reportedly was temperamental and refused to come to work for a month after part of the 12 team had left Square Enix to join Sakaguchi's new Mistwalker company. If you remember at the time, Sakaguchi in the early 2000s had departed from Square to form his own company, and a number of the Tactics team, a number of the 12 team went and joined him on Mistwalker. And in 2005, 4 years later, it was officially announced that he had stepped down from his position on the project due to a prolonged illness. And in 2006, Matsuno expressed his interest in the Wii console, stating that he was impressed by the intuitive functionality for their controller. He approached his friend, the Platinum Games producer Atsushi Inaba, to work on the scenario for the Wii game Mad World. Matsuno often consulted with the development team and received conflicting orders from the staff members. The game's designers wanted to emphasize extreme violence, but the producers wished to tone it down instead. Seems like most of today's games. Well, you go after one idea and everyone wants you to go to the next. So Matsuno's ideas and writing for the game were influenced by the necessity to balance these two different points of view. So while the original developers of Tactics Ogre were assembled to work on a reimagined port for the PlayStation Portable, Matsuno was called upon to handle the game's design and new story elements. Soon after the port was finished, level 5 President Akiro Hino entered talks with him to convince him on joining the company. So he joined in 2011. During his stay there, he developed the fantasy RPG Crimson Shroud for 3DS. He left in 2012, saying that with my work done and the domestic overseas version of my latest 3DS game, it's a good timing for me to step down and take a short break. From then on, he really didn't do much until about 2016 when he founded his own company, Algebra Factory. It was supposed to be a planning, screenplay, and production-oriented company, and during the Algebra Factory era, as it's called, he was hired by Square Enix to make the Return to Ivalice raid for Final Fantasy XIV, and again for Save the Queen for the Shadowbringers expansion. So that essentially covers what he's doing now. He has his own kind of planning, screenplay, and production company, and it's a kind of a freelance work. He gets hired by certain companies to do this and that, but he's stepped down from his role as producer and director. He remains a big consultant for Naoki Yoshida, though. He and Yoshida go out drinking a lot. It's admitted in interviews. He and Yoshida go out and grab bites to eat and go drinking quite often. So they still keep in touch, and I'm sure they still have discussions on what all they can incorporate within the next, months, years of the game.
Yes.
Matsuno is also a huge fan of Mahjong.
Yeah, he spends most of his time playing Mahjong in 14.
His Twitter is filled with pictures of him playing Mahjong in Final Fantasy XIV.
But it's quite interesting. Oh, sorry. Go.
No, go ahead. You're.
No, it's basically interesting too, the way how Matsuno treats political intrigue, and I think I went over the next the next
No, go ahead.
theme. But it's quite interesting because Matsuno is remarkably he does treat political intrigue and deeper, darker themes, but his approach to dark themes are based mostly on the human passions, like the desire of power, the desire for control, war, like what drives nations to war, the motivations behind rulers as to choose between the lesser evils, either to protect your people or basically laying down and wait for others to roll over you. It's quite interesting that in most of Matsuno's work, you don't have human characters that are, you could say, they're bad people. There's lots of characters that make questionable choices, but ultimately there's no one that's absolutely good or absolutely bad. It's a complete scale. It's scales of gray. When it comes to the pure evil, so to speak, and not even that, because with the Lucavi, you can't even, they're entirely different entities. You can't use human morality to apply to them. But I think it's telling that in Matsuno's work, humans are never black or white. It's like in the middle. Well, in the middle, like the entire spectrum. Some people would have lighter gray shades or darker gray shades, but all in all, no one is exempt of sins or virtues. So that's something quite interesting to me as a storytelling method. We all are humans and we all make bad decisions, but we also have virtues. That's quite interesting to me.
Oh, definitely. I also have an interview here with Matsuno from Matsuno and Yoshi P from Famitsu just a couple of years ago after Save the Queen questline ended and all that. So Matsuno, I'm going to go over this real quickly, and then the last 10 minutes we'll save for Q&A. So Matsuno didn't have as much say over the content as Return to Ivalice because it wasn't the focus of the content this time, so the dev team had most say about everything. Outside of the story, the two types of things he specifically requested was to make Zadnor brighter, fantasy-ish, because he thought that the Baja Southern Front was too bleak and somber, and the creation of the Diablo armament, the final boss of Dalriada. Save the Queen was initially envisioned as a 12 collab set in Dalmasca, but it turned into an original story set in Bosnia. It was also not a collaboration at all. He didn't want 12 music in there, but they didn't have a choice. I mean, Matsuno originally wanted Odin to be a required trial for Save the Queen, as the sword possession was meant to be similar, but ended up explaining the process without the need for Odin. The original concept.
Regardless, the Odin trigger weapon stuff you can find in lore logs of which Eureka. I know one Eureka.
Highly recommend people going back and reading over the Boston Resistance logs. There is a lot of hidden lore there that you will be surprised. The original concept was used to use the Tartarus, the device uncovered at the end of Return to Ivalice, and then be sent back to the past before the destruction of Bosnia by Dalamud, but Matsuno thought after playing Shadowbringers that it would be too similar to the MSQ.
Time travel! It's inevitable, Ayumi.
It is. We're just going to get a time travel expansion, and I'm just going to punch my wall. Matsuno did not know that there was a cure for tempering happening in the story, so he wanted to use this new development to cure the blades tempered by Mesija. However, the battle content designer told him that the blades would be transformed into Delibrum with no way of turning back to human to save them, surprising Matsuno. He decided that he should save at least one of the tempered blades, which ended up being Lovro. So yes, in case you didn't know, whenever you go into Delibrum, all of the monsters that you face in there, the enemies that you face, are former Resistance members. They've just been Edwarded. They've just been alchemically combined
into weird-ass Lucavi abominations.
Yep. One of the characters was supposed to be someone called Kagura, which is hinted to be Makoto's older sister, but ended up being scrapped. Yoshida highlights that the field records are almost exactly as Matsuno wrote it, and he didn't change anything, so don't panic if the epilogue in the field record, it was planned. They are aware of the field records hinting at a future to the story, and Matsuno said it envisioned to continue after the liberation of Dalmasca. So there was always going to be some kind of time gap. So he wrote it so that there is a chance to continue it. Yoshida said that if they would make it a story after the liberation of Dalmasca, he would like to see it in the style of the relic content in 525, basically story content with a trial at the end. Yoshida said that Frayne and the Wall would meet again in the future after the aftermath and focus on things she left unsaid, hiding the fact that Ash is still alive and why Lion did what he did, seemingly killing Gabranth. 525 story itself was taken from ideas Matsuno had for a Vagrant Story 2 that never came to be.
Yeah, one of the games that's for the 3DS, Crimson Shroud, is also hinted to be part of the drafts for Vagrant Story 2. That's quite interesting.
Yes. It felt like Yoshida and Matsuno kind of wanted for this content to be Matsuno's own Stormblood. They were going over how Matsuno wanted Fordola executed back then if Raban was to take on the future of Alamigo. Yoshida talked about how Basaljan was the kind of character only Matsuno would write, someone with a lot of resentment against the Empire, but puts them aside seeking only hope, finding an easier way and faster way to end the war, namely the Wall. Lion and Baselgian were Yoshida's two favorite characters. Yoshida said that the content made justice to the parts of Stormblood they couldn't write at the time. It was also Yoshida that wanted to have the two stories, this and Warlich, that focuses on different factions of the Empire. One of the scrapped ideas was to have the wall as a juror to decide Mystige's execution, but it seems that the general feeling was that the players did not want to have the kind of stress, so they changed you from acting as observer instead. It seems the general feeling from them is that players are tired of war stories, especially during COVID times, and they didn't want this kind of weight. Yoshida said that this is what Final Fantasy XIV's world is, and it will obviously divide people to live in a world rife with conflicts. And it seems that it is the reason Matsuno doesn't want a war and for the liberation of Dalmasca, but a story that happens after that. So considering how things are going in Dalmasca now, with the Empire in decline, we could very well see a return to Ivalice, like we were promised.
I don't think it's inevitable. We will return to Ivalice.
We will.
Perhaps
We definitely will.
sooner than later. That's a nice number.
Q&A time. Anyone have any questions, concerns?
So we had a comment earlier about the description of Auracite matching that of Azem's powers in Dawn Trail.
About that.
Are we sure we want to go into that right now?
About that.
With 30 minutes.
So, for those of you that, of course, are aware of the ending, one of the ending cutscenes to Dawn Trail, well, not ending, I guess. We could go back to Sven's little monologue about the key reacts to fervent prayers, all-consuming supplications that give rise to many a miracle. That pretty much describes exactly what Auracite is, in that it reacts to fervent prayers and desires. So we were onto that long before that. Before it was a theory. Yes. The key. We as a team are unanimous in the thought that the key itself is Auracite, or at least based on the construction of Auracite. Yes, go ahead.
It fits to a global description of Ultima Origin Auracite. So yeah, as a team, I think the entire LoreLines cast does agree on this point. So of course it could be wrong, but
I've seen other people say it's like primal powers and everything, but that's kind of like a worship and prayer thing. It's one and the same, but you're using this as a focus. And we've only seen one thing throughout our history books, lore books, cutscenes, all that fits this description all around, and that's Auracite.
I would bring up 2 points to the key, the grail, whatever you want to call it, to bear in mind with Auracite.
Preservation.
To bear in mind with this description. With Auracite, with it being Auracite in mind, one question would be, how does this tie with Azem? And second, in the Ivalice raids, we learn that this sort of Auracite can be also used to record memories and messages, because that's what Ramsa does to Delita, to give him the message that Ramsa, had to be remembered as a heretic in order to keep the world from the threat of Ultima. So that's something to bear in mind.
All right, another question. Do you believe Ultima will be coming into the story as a main antagonist? And if so, do you think it'll be sooner or later?
I do believe so. Meowth is laughing because she wrote a 200-page book on this. I believe so. In fact, we actually just got finished about a month or two ago making an entire video on how this will be a thing. You can go ahead and check it out on our YouTube channel. It's called the next villain in Final Fantasy XIV has already been revealed, and we kind of go into how Ultima and where can you get 200? Well, we call that the unholy file, and I don't think it'll ever be published.
It's literally over 200 pages.
250 pages. It's basically madcap speculation. I mean, I'm not opposed to sharing it, but not in public. If you want it, you can contact with me later if you want it. It's madcap speculation.
Another question. You mentioned earlier Nethicite and its implications for Dawn Trail. Is it safe to assume that Electrope is a sort of Nethicite analog, given how it's been described?
To give you the short answer, yes. But since it's not named Nethicite, for now, we do know that Electrope is how the Alexandrians call it. We don't know how its proper name is, if it has one. Maybe it can be called Nethicite per se. We know that it does work similar, but it's just a thought to bear in mind. We're not saying that it is Nethicite. If I don't know if I'm explaining that right.
No, I think that's correct.
It could be. It couldn't be.
I also want to point out that Electrope in Eorzean Encyclopedia 3 is confirmed to also be on the first.
Well, confirmed, not, but heavily implied.
Well, I mean, it's the same properties as
Yes.
Electrope, and it is.
I mean, it's not mentioned like that, but let's go with heavily implied, just to cover our backs.
Yeah.
Electrope is on the first? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and go over this, Cobb, real quick.
It's under the entry in
it's-
Encyclopedia Eorzean, beneath the entry, under the entry of the Rise of the Elves.
Yeah, it's under the Rise of the Elves, and basically how the Elven civilization conquered the area of Norvrant. They found a mineral that helped them channel etheric power, and basically they used that as a conduit to amplify their abilities. And the way it's described is almost identical to how Electrope is described.
I think it's safe to assume it's in the source as well.
I would say that's a safe bet, yeah.
House of the Crook Coin!
Yeah. They mentioned that they were getting tired of war stories. Do you think they'll ever do another war story with politics? Not a war for liberation, but between multiple morally gray factions with more politics involved. Preferably in Ivalice or Elsewhere.
I think that they will kind of avoid that for now, just because... Okay, so you know how games are made, you know how entertainment's made, you know that making a story based around sensitive subjects currently going on in the world may kind of hurt how you want to present things. You may end up offending someone, you may end up hurting someone.
It's like treading on eggshells, basically.
Yeah, and that's just the way that today's world is. That you tread on eggshells whenever you try and create a game, because you don't want to end up offending someone. I think that they will try to do another political intrigue game, another type of war story game, but it won't be as exciting or as interesting as before.
I personally think...
Or they will heavily censor it.
I would personally say that they have been... Yoshida has been hinting about Hingashi and their basically clan war in recent interviews. I don't think this is going to be anywhere near a full expansion, but I do think it could be potentially our next side content expansion. Side content plotline. It would make sense. I'm not going to go into speculation here, but I would say that for side content, this sort of political intrigue is more suitable than the main.
Yep, fair enough. Another
But
question.
I'm expecting them to happen. But yeah.
Ayumi, since you are a big Vieira fan, do you think there is a chance to see a Vieira tribe around the area in the near future? So I guess
So what I like,
do we expect to see it?
what I liked about Dawn Trail is that they introduced new tribes and new um kind of new tribes of the existing races that we have on Etheres. So we don't just have at least with Vera, we don't just have the Vina and the Ryan of Dalmasca. Now we have the Shatona of Taral, which is to say that there can not be more tribes elsewhere that we haven't found just yet, as we haven't discovered or explored all of Etheres yet. So yes, I do expect to find at least one more tribe of Vieira someplace else. Just not on Taral. We've discovered the ones that we've met on Taral. I mean that's been confirmed at least by the locals that there is no other ones that they made their home in Chactel. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we found one maybe like in Mericidia or maybe the parts of Author that we haven't explored yet. I'm hopeful. Maybe we can even discover some other new tribe of Aura, or anything can go at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting that they chose to go to give the VR race kind of like this relevance come Dawn Trail, especially with the whole Ivalice. Let's say implications.
I mean, it's the same thing that happened with the Garleans. Some splintered off and did their own things, and while most of them, went north.
Also worth mentioning, the Garleans have also evolution ties.
Yes. More questions. Do you think there will be more development use of auspices? Do auspices have souls?
Well, they're basically Tural withdrawal in a sense. It's with the difference that the auspices are supposed to be in balance with their Nigimitama and Naramitama, which is basically the reasonable soul and the feral soul, or they're part of the souls. The Tural withdrawal, I think their name translates to Tyrant of Tural, and they're basically alpha predators. The concept is the same, but it seems like as if they divided into two branches. Either you can in the far east they go auspice, and in Tural they go Tural withdrawal for some reason.
Hope that cleared things up for you.
Hopefully.
Okay, I think we are at time. Do we want to go ahead and plug ourselves?
Yes, so we have about a minute. So if we want to go ahead and drop our weekly podcast recording and our YouTube channel, we also have a Twitter, and we will actually also be doing a live show at Gateway Fate in 2 weeks.
Yes, so if you guys are attending, you can see us in person. We will be doing a live show.
Except me, I will be in avatar form.
Yeah, you'll be in avatar form, but you'll still be there. You're not getting out of this.
I can't travel there only for the show from Spain.
I'll give you the laughing man, not graphic.
All right, everybody. That about does it. Again, we are LoreLines. You can find us online on Twitch at LoreLines and on YouTube at LoreLines as well. We kind of LoreLines XIV rather. So thank you again. I hope you have had a wonderful AetherCon. And we have one more panel after this, leveling up your life using Final Fantasy XIV skills in real life. So please look forward to that. Hope you had a wonderful convention.
Thank you.